Good afternoon. Elizabeth Alexander is a poet, playwright, and scholar. She is the author of 4 books of poetry: The Venus Hottentot, The Body of Life, Antebellum Dream Book, and American Sublime, which was a finalist for the 2006 Pulitzer Prize and was named one of the 25 notable books of 2005 by the American Library Association. She is a scholar of African American literature and culture, and recently published a collection of essays, The Black Interior. She's also co-authored a work of poetry for children with Marilyn Nelson, illustrated by Floyd Cooper, entitled Miss Crandall's School for Young Ladies and Little Misses of Color. Her poetry has been widely published in periodicals and anthologies. She has received many grants and honors, most recently the Alphonse Fletcher Senior Fellowship for work which, quote, contributes to the improving of race relations in American society and furthers the broad social goals of the U.S. Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education decision of 1954. She's also the recipient of the Jackson Prize for Poetry, awarded by Poets and Writers. She received her PhD in English from the University of Pennsylvania and is a professor of African American Studies at Yale. Currently, she is a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. Of American Sublime, Rita Dove wrote, in narratives sweetened by the lyric pulse and pierced through by felicitous turns of irony, Alexander chronicles the world of black and tan. Her poems bristle with the irresistible quality of a world seen fresh. Race is present in her poems in the way that sex, class, age, and even the weather are present in all of our lives. Personally, what I've enjoyed in Alexander's work is not only that she successfully tackles complex issues of culture, race, history, and gender in the U.S., she manages to do it with uncommon grace, music, and humor. Her Ars Poetica series first caught my fancy. In Ars Poetica 23, What's Up, G, she plays with vernacular in a way that makes me laugh, want to move, sit up, and take note. Ars Poetica 88, Sublime, is sassy and musical. For example, girl talk, sweet or savory, nutmeg or cinnamon, jalapeno or scotch bonnet, maraschino cherry or Angostura bitters. Ars Poetica number 227, Provenance, is one of the more moving list poems I've encountered. She takes us through the Civil Rights era via names, places, and cultural touchstones. This afternoon, poet and scholar Elizabeth Alexander will read from her own work and present the Academy of American Poets Prize. On behalf of the Creative Writing and MFA program, the English Department, and the William Monroe Trotter Institute for the Study of Black Culture, please join me in welcoming her. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here with you all. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Joyce, for being organizer extraordinaire. Felt myself in good hands. Let me put this up a little bit. That's a bit better, I think, right? Good. I want to start with a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks, who is among the many poets who have been important to me. She's perhaps my mother. So, and just being out here by the water made me, I knew that I wanted to read a Brooks poem. I like to open with her poems. And the water out here led me to this one. The person, Bessie, in the poem is a character that we see often in Gwendolyn Brooks's poems. She is a African-American domestic worker on Chicago's South Side in the 1940s. Betsy of Bronzeville visits Mary and Norman at a beach house in New Buffalo. You said, now take your shoes off, while what played was not the backtown boogie, but a green, wet music stuff above the wide and clean sand, and my hand laughed. Toes urged the slab to amber foam, and I was hurt by the cider in the air. And what the lake wash did was dizzying. I thought of England as I watched you bring the speckled pebbles, the smooth quartz. I thought of Italy. Italy and England come. A sea sits up and starts to sing to me. That's Gwendolyn Brooks. And now, for good luck, a new poem. I think that if you read them, then maybe more will come. At least that's what I hope. That they're kind of incantations if you read new poems. The Elders. Watched him glitter, watched him gleam, shook his unrough hands with their cotton-scarred hands, cut their eyes at him, observed the ease with which he smiled. Asked, finally, what is love and who are the people and how must we love them and what do we need? What is now? Look at the lines in the corner of Youngblood's eyes, lined not unlike our hands. And perhaps this is not gleam but illumination, not merely his but ours. I'm going to read some poems from American Sublime. You see, I brought my whole life up here, and so it's precariously balanced on this podium. But before I do that, I also want to read just a teeny piece of prose from this book of essays, The Black Interior, that just gives an idea of what I hope and believe poetry and art can do, should do, how it exists in our society. So this is just a little squib from the preface that begins with a quotation. Today, as the news from Selma and Saigon poisons the air like fallout, wrote the poet Robert Hayden in the late 1960s, I come again to see the serene, great picture that I love. In Hayden's poem, culture consoles, and the artifact stands as a record of the human trace, a history of the individual voice and collective living spirit. Art is where and how we speak to each other in tongues audible when official language fails. It is not where we go to escape the world's ills, but rather one place where we go to make sense of them. Each day's news brings word of human atrocity and violation, as too many of us linger in pernicious and calcified ideas of who the other is. In desperate times when a citizen's raised voice seems to make no difference at all, it feels useful to turn to the art and popular culture with which we speak across difference, from each to say, this is who I am, and thus, this is who we collectively are. What might we hope for and work toward? Culture is one way I take in the world and venture beyond my boundaries, where I often find politics as well as aesthetic joy so deep I experience it in my body, where I shift and have sometimes shifted others through my own writing and teaching. The work I do is culture work, and culture is what calls many of us into the conundrums of the public sphere. Culture and politics need not present an either-or proposition if politics is restored to its original meaning of the polis, the village, the community. Sometimes we encounter truths in culture not necessarily verifiable against census records or voting rolls. Sometimes in culture, we find what we are hoping for before we have been able to articulate or enact it. And so I hope that that is the way that you all experience art as well, at least sometimes, that it can sometimes give us a vision of things in the world that we might not even have words or vision for, that it can help us get to our own visions of how to be productive and transformative in our own communities. I'm happy you liked those Ars Poeticas. You gave me the list of a few of them that I'm going to read. And before that, some other poems. Emancipation. Corncob constellation, oyster shell, drawstring pouch, dry bones. Gree-gree in the rafters, hoodoo in the sleeping nook, mojo in Linda Brent's crawl space. 19th century corncob cosmogram set on the dirt floor beneath the slant roof, left intact the afternoon that someone came and told those slaves, we're free. Ellipsis. White blossoming trees in front of the house, in Sparta, Georgia, where they together lived. Free woman of color, black, white Cherokee, white male slaver, and their children, who slept with the mother in a mouse room connected to his rooms through secret doors. He gave his daughters diamonds, which they wore set in rings on their toes and hid in their hair. Distant white relatives fought for the railroad stock when he died, and they won. They also got the house. You can smell the funk of the haints in the walls, mildew, semen, camphor, oft-handled bills, coin metal, cornbread breath that whispers and swallows and breathes. One day, as in the best bodice rippers, the house burned down to the ground, burnt down by the distant white cousin who no doubt heard the ghosts humming and fussing, rattling, ratcheting, singing. Burn, she screamed. So it did. The fussing quieted. In its place, wind in the willows, a whiff of something sweet, something sour, something always in its place. Tina Green. Small story, hair story, Afro-American story, only black girl in my class story, pre-adolescence story, black teacher story. Take your hair out, they beg on the playground, the cool girls, the straight and shiny hair girls, the girls who can run. Take your hair out, they say. It is Washington hot, we are running, I do, and it swells, snatches up at the nape, levitates, woolly universe, nodding, fleece, zeppelin, run. So I do, into school, to the only black teacher I'll have until college, the only black teacher I've had to that point, the only black teacher to teach at that school, full of white people who tell the truth I love. The teacher I love, whose name I love, whose hair I love, takes me in the teacher's bathroom and wordlessly fixes my hair, perfectly, wordlessly, fixes my hair into 3 tight plaits. When? In the early 1980s, the black men were divine. Spoke French, had read everything, made filet mignon with green peppercorn sauce, listened artfully to boyfriend troubles, operatically declaimed boyfriend troubles, had been to Bamako and Bahia, knew how to clear bad humors from a house, had been to Baldwin's villa in St. Paul, drank espresso with Soyinka and Senghor, kissed hello on both cheeks, quoted Baraka's black art, fuck poems, and they are useful, tore up the disco dance floor, were gold lit, photographed well, did not smoke, said ciao. Then all the men's faces were spotted. The end. The last thing of you is a doll. Velveteen and spangle, silk Dupany trousers, Alibaba slippers that curl up at the toes, tinsel mustache. A doll we had made in your image for our wedding with one of me, which you have. They sat atop our coconut cake. We cut it into snowy squares and fed each other while God watched. All other things are gone now. The letters boxed, pajama-sized shirts bagged for Goodwill, odd utensils farmed to graduating students starting first apartments, citrus zester, apple corer, rusting mandolin. Childhood pictures returned to your mother, trinkets sorted real from fake and molten to a single bar of gold, untruths parsed, most things unsnarled, the rest let go. Save the doll, which I find in a closet, examine closely, then set into a hospitable tree, which I drive past daily for weeks and see it still there, in the rain, in the wind, fading in the sun. No one will take it. It will not blow away. In the rain, in the wind, it holds tight to its branch. Then, one day, it is gone. That's a true story. Krishna denies eating mud. If you've ever seen any of those amazing, amazing little mogul miniature paintings, the kind that you have to look at with a magnifying glass, they're absolutely extraordinarily beautiful. And just stories and stories and stories are in these teeny tiny paintings. So this title comes from one of those paintings, and the painting is called Krishna Denies Eating Mud. Blue boy, the apple of his mother's ravening eyes. Blue as the noon sky, blue as the sea, beautiful Krishna, come to me. The boy eats rocks, eats nails, great fistfuls of mud. Mother pries the bud mouth open and looks inside, a globe, planets, oceans, telescopes, Milky Way, books, beasts, flowers, vegetables, minutes, time, history, the universe in Krishna's mouth. Mother faints, astonished. Krishna, you will remember none of this. Mother, awakening. Angel, blue angel, come sit on my lap. Come sit on my starry skirt. Stray. On the beach close to sunset, a dog runs toward us fast, agitated, perhaps feral, scrounging for anything he can eat. We pull the children close and let him pass. Is there such a thing as a stray child? Simon asks. Like if a mother had a child from her body, but then decided she wanted to be a different child's mother. What would happen to that first child? The dog finds a satisfying scrap and calms. The boys break free and leap from rock to rock. I was a stray man before I met your mother, you say, but they have run on and cannot hear you. How fast they run on, past the dark pool your voice makes, our arms which hold them back. I was a stray man before I met you, you say. This time you are speaking to me. Notes from. We are underground. Underground. A cinder block barrack, red clay warren, at times a seaside cottage far away. Austere and opulent, Spartan and lush, where we struggle to hear ourselves think. It is not 45 when the A-bomb was dropped. Kimono flowers burned onto skin, shadows remaindered on walls after bodies disintegrate. Not 55 when Emmett Till was lynched, nor 63 when the Birmingham church girls were blown to smithereens. And here now the sister who survived, now in her 50s, tell of the dress sash she was in the midst of tying, her glass eye that pops out and rolls across the room. Not 65 when Malcolm, not 68 when King, when My Lai, not and not and not but now, which is why we are down in the underground. Sun salutation at dawn, we fill our lungs with available air and light, exhale the detritus, breathe in again. How much light does a bomb flash make, and what can it do? Can it photostat a body with kimono print? Today, the Vietnam hero reveals his Bronze Star was won by ordering civilians shot as his men escaped the village. The village woman says she saw her sisters and brothers and mothers and aunts lined up and shot into a pile. Who is surprised to hear how war medals are won? Underground, analysis must overcome surprise. In Chicago, Girl X, who can no longer speak, tells a courtroom in nods and grunts what happened and who dragged and raped and beat her out of herself so she forgot it, until smoke from a magician's act at school reminded her of his smell and the rest. What reminded the war hero 30 years later that he ordered a village slaughtered? His absent leg tells us what we want war heroes to say. We are underground because 12-year-old boys are sent to prison for the rest of their lives, and 18-year-olds recruited to guard them, and dead children are collateral damage to the homegrown bomber who will sit in the electric chair on television so a public can watch him blaze out and find succor. Too many people have seen too much and lived to tell or not to tell or tell with their silent, patterned bodies, their glass eyes, gone legs, flower-printed flesh, ropey scar tissue, nods and grunts, tics and eczemas. Under the front porch in the loam of the burning and smoking land, the defoliated, under that pyre of bones, we scrabble and struggle together to hear ourselves think. The African Picnic. World Cup Finals, France v. Brazil. We gather in Gideon's yard and grill. The TV sits in the bright sunshine. We want Brazil, but Brazil won't win. Aiden waves a desultory green and yellow flag. From the east to the west, to the west to the east, we scatter and settle and scatter some more. Through the window, Mama watches from the cool indoors. Jonah scarfs meat off of everybody's plate, kicks a basketball long and hollers goal, then roars like the mighty lion he is. Baby is a pasha surrounded by pillows and a bevy of Horn of Africa girls who coo like lovers, pronounce his wonders, oil and massage him, brush his hair. My African family is having a picnic here in the USA. Who is here and who is not? When will the phone ring from far away? Who in a few days will say goodbye? Who will arrive with a package from home? Who will send presents in other people's luggage and envelopes of money in other people's pockets? Other people's children have become our children here at the African Picnic. In a parking lot, in a taxi cab, in a winter coat, in an airport queue, at the INS, on the telephone, on the crosstown bus, on a south side street, in a brand new car, in a jalaba, with a cardboard box, with a Samsonite, with an airmail post, with a bag of spice. At the African Picnic, people come and go. The mailman sees us say goodbye and waves with us, goodbye, goodbye, as we throw popcorn, ululate. 10 or 12 suitcases stuffed in the car. Goodbye, Mama, goodbye. The front door shut, the driveway bare. Goodbye, Mama, goodbye. The jet alights into the night, a huge metal machine in flight. Goodbye, Mama, goodbye. At the African Picnic, people come and go and say goodbye. First word of the Mass for the dead. As there is such a thing as the end of a line, the elders whose passing occasions the congregation to say, they don't make them like that anymore. Walter Warren Harper, Zemamesh Berhe, Gwendolyn Brooks. You think of the elders still walking for whom you hold your breath, and write but do not speak those names, so him with the square toes, Zora Neale Hurston. Perhaps we'll forget the street name, house number, not this one this time. It only postpones the next berefting. Where did my grandfather secret his ring of gold keys? What is sewn into his mattress? And no one asked his mother's name. So there is now no name for me to write. Autumn Passage. On suffering, which is real, on the mouth, which never closes, the air that dries the mouth. On the miraculous dying body, its greens and purples. On the beauty of hair itself. On the dazzling toddler, like eggplant, he says, when you say vegetable, chrysanthemum to flower. On his grandmother's suffering, larger than vanished skyscrapers, September zucchini, other things too big. For her glory that goes along with it, glory of grown children's vigil, communal fealty, glory of the body that operates even as it falls apart, the body that can no longer even make fever, but nonetheless burns, florid and bright and magnificent, as it dims, as it shrinks, as it turns to something else. I'm going to read a few of these Ars Poeticas. Of course, you know Ars Poetica is a poem about the art of writing poetry, but I wanted to think about Ars Poetica in a broader sense than that. I wanted to think about the artfulness with which we go about our days, the quotidian arts, if you will, the ways that we bring artfulness to do and order to doing the smallest things. That's what I wanted to think about in these poems. So Ars Poetica number 10, Crossing Over. And don't be alarmed, you know, when it's like Ars Poetica number 1000. Not only are there not 1000, but even if there were, I wouldn't read you 1000. I'm just going to read you a few. Ars Poetica number 10, Crossing Over. Like the low shaker cradle, sized for a diminished adult, in which they rocked their elderly to death. Or the 5 evangelical nurses who sang the Jewish woman to the precipice, then told her to let go to Jesus in a humming circle. Like the mother of 2 sons who sent them away so they would not see their mother die, who refused the shaker cradle. Like you, like our mother, who kept us as close for as long as she could, then sent us away so she could. Ars Poetica number 28, African Leavetaking Disorder. I always have to say a poem with a joke in it so that you can look for it with a song in your hearts. Ars Poetica number 28, African Leavetaking Disorder. The talk is good. The 2 friends linger at the door. Urban crickets sing with them. There is no after the supper and talk. The talk is good. The 2 friends linger at the door, half in, half out, till one decides to walk the other home. And so they walk, more talk, the new doorstep, the night-gowned wife who shakes her head and smiles from the bedroom window as the men talk in love and the crickets sing along. The joke would be if the one now home walked the other one home, where they started, to keep talking, and so on. African leave-taking disorder, which names her children everywhere, trying to come back together and talk. Ars Poetica number 85. Modijadi V, the Rain Queen, dies in South Africa at 64. Young people, she complains, have lost touch with religion, and no one ever asks me to make rain. Ars Poetica number 227, Provenance. Coretta, Malcolm, do your very best, try again, the bump, the Latin hustle. Murray Evers, Betty Shabazz, Nixon, Agnew, J. Edgar Hoover, Crispus Attucks, Harriet Tubman, the North Star, North. The Black Cat Bone, Room 222, Ron Dellums, Charles Rangel, Shirley Chisholm, Free Angela. Hot Breakfast, Prepare, Alberto VO5, Vitapoint, Ebony Jet Headquarters, Stocking Cap. Twice as Good, Wear an Extra Layer, Valhalla, Harlem. Ars Poetica number 56, Bullfrogs was falling out of the sky. And that's a quotation from Boondini Brown, who was Muhammad Ali's cornerman. Drew Boondini Brown. For those of you who aren't avid boxing fans, or of a generation. But he was an amazing character. Not frogs, but bullfrogs. Not rain, but fat rain. Not Congo, but Zaire and Mobutu Sese Seko. Mobutu Sese Seko, his solid gold toilet seat, leopard skin, Fez, international airstrip. Not stealing, but plundering. Not Congo, Zaire. Not Drew, but Boondini. Not Baptist, but Jew. Not Cassius Muhammad. Not Jesus, but Allah. The Quran, the Bible is black. Do like it says on the mayonnaise jar, keep cool but do not freeze. Do like it says on the mayonnaise jar, keep cool but do not freeze. Not Afro but Africa, booty but plunder, rain that astonishes, rain like bullfrogs. Mobutu, Mobutu, both booty and plunder. Oh, Africa, Africa, God in the rain. Ars Poetica number 2, Christening. We pour radiant water on a rose bush, off the walking path, water from the baby's bath, the 3rd day after christening. He'd wailed in the tiled font, then came to us serene, tonsured, agleam with holy oil, damp with sacred water in his new white clothes. We waited 3 days. We bathed the luminous child. We saved that precious water. We sanctified the roses. Ars Poetica number 336, Rose-Colored Glasses. Mom said, sometimes I dream we reclaim the apartment which is even more beautiful than it was then and perfect. Where you swung on a trapeze in the dining room archway, played checkers with a dolly big enough to be your sister, plink-plinked on the piano, your little dog's nails scratching the hardwood floors when he heard you walking from the elevator. Where there was no divorce, there was no desperation, where one day you would cut off your 2 long braids and your mother would save them. Ars Poetica number 88, Sublime. In a pickle, we talk our way out of our corners. We can the rough stuff. Overture, theme and variation, call and response, I equals we. Girl could talk, sweet or savory, nutmeg or cinnamon, jalapeno or Scotch bonnet, maraschino, cherry, or Angostura bitters. Sing, your mouth an O which bubbles tra-la-la or reaches low to where nobody knows. What a baby knows. The word as vowel, the word as element, the need to sing. And I just want to conclude. As you know, we've just marked the 40th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. And so I just wanted to read a little bit from a poem that in part remembers that day. And so all you need to know is that I grew up in Washington, D.C. So 2 pieces of this. It's called Fugue. 1, Walking, 1963, after the painting by Charles Alston. You tell me knees are important. You kiss your elders' knees in utmost reverence. The knees in this painting are what send the people forward. Once progress felt real and inevitable, as sure as the taste of licorice or lemons. The painting was made after marching in Birmingham, walking into a light both brilliant and unseen. 3, 1968. The city burns. We have to stay at home. TV always interrupted with fire or helicopters. Men who have tweedled my cheeks once or twice join the serial dead. Yesterday I went downtown with Mom. What a pretty little girl, said the tourists who were white. My shoes were patent leather, all shiny and black. My father is away saving the world for Negroes, I wanted to say. Mostly I go to school or watch television with my mother and brother, my father often gone. He makes the world a better place for Negroes. The year is 1968. And so I wanted just to end with that because these days I feel, well, I feel different ways on different days, but I think that the country is in the midst of something very extraordinary in our electoral politics, and I feel more like 1963 these days, that there is that feeling of walking into a light both brilliant and unseen, that there is something that is light and possible in front of us, and that we don't know where we'll be if we walk towards it. So thank you very much. And before we have questions, I want to announce the winner and the runner-up. It comes with a confession, a terrible confession. Well, first let me say the winner before I say the confession so as not to taint this moment. The winner is Barbara Perez. Is she here? Very beautiful, very artful poems that I enjoyed very, very much and admired very, very much. And then the confession part is that the carefully organized and marked stack of poems sits as we speak on my desk at Radcliffe, which I understand makes me half as negligent as a previous visitor. But the honorable mention poet wrote a poem so very extraordinary that concluded with such an extraordinary image that I wonder if you wrote this extraordinary image, then we will know who you are. It concludes with the poem says that when I dream my sister, and it ends with an extraordinary image of the sister opening a lizard's jaws and clipping the lizard to her ear. Did anybody here write that image? You'd have to confess that you wrote something beautiful. And if you didn't write it, you couldn't fake that you wrote it. Okay, does that sound familiar to anybody? All right, well, by email first thing tomorrow morning, the results will be made, but if you think you know who that person is, her poems were very beautiful indeed as well, so congratulations. I feel like I should have a trophy to give you. Yeah. So, questions now? Yes.
Who was the runner-up?
Excuse me?
Who was the runner-up?
That's what I feel very embarrassed. I don't remember the name because I left the poems on my desk.
I get you.
But perhaps better to remember the images in the poem. So you'll know tomorrow morning. Yeah. So are there any questions or comments? I would love to have a conversation with you. Yes.
I'm very interested that you begin your readings with a poem by Joleen Brooks, and I just wanted to know if you wanted to talk a little bit about your relationship to books, or if that would take an entire afternoon. I'm asking you a little more than
I can do a succinct version of it. First of all, I very much like when poets begin readings with someone else's poems. I think it's a nice way of sort of seeding the fields with poetry and of thinking about the ways that our work only exists in a continuum and in a conversation and in a community with the work of other poets. I mean, it really, really, really is so. An even more perhaps pragmatic reason for me is that even if it's not necessarily evident in the reading of one poem, I like having the opportunity to say that if you were to think more about my poems, you would understand them even more richly if you looked at them next to Gwendolyn Brooks. I also do that because I believe that for any poet, not just for Brooks, you know, our work it gets lost. It's not talked about enough. It is a work or an art form that really needs to be kept alive and advocated for and lived in. So you know, the thought to me that you know, there are people who don't know Gwendolyn Brooks's work, because of course there are plenty, because there are many who don't know all kinds of poets' work. This is, you know, terrible, terrible. So I feel that I have to, it feels like a good duty to sort of say, hey, check this person out. Gwendolyn Brooks is someone who I read the anthologized version of Brooks, you know, a few poems here and there. You all probably know the poem We Real Cool. We Real Cool, We Left School, you know, that's the one that's most anthologized, a very remarkable poem when I was a kid. But really her work became more important to me when I was older and really fully a poet, that was what I knew I was trying to be. I admire so very, very much her combination of incredible, incredible deftness with form. I mean, she can do absolutely anything, it seems, with form. And she also is a poet of place, of Chicago's South Side. She often says, you know, she lived pretty much, she was born in Kansas, but she pretty much lived in a 10-block radius for 80-some years of her life. But she says all you had to do was go to the window and there was a poem outside. So there's a way in which she was very much of her community, and you could tell that she was listening to people talk. And for me, spoken, the way people talk is important along with what I have read. But you would not necessarily, you know, her poems are not particularly chatty or vernacular, apparently. But you can tell that, you know, for her, it's a sort of a bringing together of all of the influences that I think is extraordinary and that I've learned a great, great deal from. I knew her a little bit, and she was legendarily, and in my experience as well, a tremendously generous citizen of poetry. So, for example, you know, at every reading she did, and you know, I do it now too. There are lucky winners. You know, she would come with a tote bag of, she was actually even, she did much more than I've done. She'd come with a tote bag of books, and that tote bag would be empty by the time the reading was over and over and over again. To the youngest people were always the ones who got the books. And I've also seen her time and time again. I mean, you know, by the time I was seeing her read, every reading would have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And even when she was very old, she would stay for 2 hours signing everyone's book, having a word with them. She funded poetry contests out of her pocket. She, you know, sent the famous story of some young people who she knew, and she said, you know what your work really needs? You need to go to Africa. And she sent them. She sent this pair to Africa. Never had any money because she was like that. You know, it would come to her and she would spend it. And she didn't make a career as a teacher either. Did some teaching, but, you know, really made her living as a poet. Made her living from the gigs, and lived modestly and lived generously. And so that was always something for me to see as well, that someone who is that brilliant, I mean, you know, I will not rest until, you know, she's really is, to my mind, really, really, you know, one of the 5 most significant poets of the 20th century, really, really, really. And, you know, if we had hours and hours, I could talk, you know, I think her much vaunted contemporary, Robert Lowell, pales next to her work in A Serious Assessment. I really do think that. Not by way of sort of diminishing Lowell's accomplishment, but by way of saying a lot of the way that we remember poets and that they are canonized has to do with the people who are talking about them and what kind of cultural capital those talkers can bring, you know, to their assessments of the poets. She's very important. I edited this collection, which it's a nice one. It's I love these little Library of America, the American Poets Project. These nice little essential books. And what's nice about this collection is that it's the only one that goes absolutely from beginning to end with her work. Obviously it's small, so it doesn't have everything that you would want to have in it, but it does have the span of her very, very, very productive life. So that's Brooks in a nutshell. A wonderful person, but also a real unique genius. And nobody sounds like her. And she didn't sound like anybody else to me. And I think that without being sort of willful about that, you know, she just had her own voice in that way that, you know, when you see a poet has truly sort of found their power, you just wouldn't mistake a line of hers for anybody else's, even though there are many imitators, myself included. So that's Brooks. Somebody gets this book too. Yes?
Do you have any of her books with you?
I have this one, The Essential Gwendolyn Brooks.
Will you sell it to me?
I'll give it to you, actually. You're the one. You spoke up, so this is your present. So I'll give it to you after.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Good. Any other? Yes.
I have a couple of questions, actually. One is I'd like to know how in your poetry you negotiate the line between autobiography and fiction.
Mm-hmm.
The second question is I'd like to know what, in your estimation, are the characteristics of an age of poetry, when poetry is supreme in a culture and speaks to the trends and the needs of that time, and if we're in an age of poetry now.
Mm-hmm.
fascinated by your use of Negro when you were writing about your father and saying that he's off saving the world for Negroes or something to that effect. And I want to know about the politics of using that term. So those are my three.
Great. Okay, let's go backwards.
Sure.
1968 is that poem. In 1968, maybe just about, maybe most African Americans, as we now have been instructed that we shall call ourselves, because of course, it's changed. It's changed throughout history, and if you talk to some black people of a certain age, they've been 5 things, I guess, gone from colored to Negro, black to Afro-American, so nothing is permanent. And I tend to revert back to black, which was my first grown-up term for myself. It gets a little complicated to change all the time. But in 1968, most Negroes have become or are becoming black, right? We're in the midst of the Black Power movement, the Black Arts movement. In using that term to be specific about that moment in time, I felt that there was something a little bit formal and old-fashioned about Negro. That it was a formal locution that talked about a kind of, if you will, race work, right? What it meant to be a race person, going off and feeling that it was your duty to make things better for your people. And that is a phrase that the child speaker has probably heard from the old folks, right? And it's something that's repeated in a moment of tremendous stress that's described in the poem. I mean, if you think about what's described in the poem, it's young children who are home without a father, in the midst of a burning city, in the midst of the greatest national crisis, or one of the greatest national crises, in a country in an era of these tremendously traumatic national crises. So, it seems kind of important that the child would be almost resorting to this comfort phrase. That's how the grown-ups explain the chaos. He's away saving the world for Negroes. Maybe that's what was told to Dr. King's children. He's away saving the world for Negroes. He's trying to make the world a better place for Negroes. So that's how I think about that, the use of that term in that particular moment. Going to the first question, autobiography and fiction, and maybe are you thinking about kind of the autobiographical in the poems, the sort of truth element in the poems? Yeah. My sort of standard line on that, which I think is true, is also a teaching line, which is to say many extraordinary things happen to all of us. Most of those things cannot be made into compelling poems, in my opinion. It's very, very difficult, and Sterling Brown had a great thing to say about it. He said, every eye is a dramatic eye. So therefore, if you're talking about something that happened to you, or if you're completely making something up, you still have the same job as a poet to use language and craft that makes what you're telling convincing. And sometimes we get fooled, we get hypnotized by the autobiographical. Because it's so vivid to us, it's so real to us, it's so compelling to us, it's so important to us. But the challenge of milling that, if you will, into, I'm mixing my metaphors, into gold, spinning it into gold, is the poet's hard work. And so I think, I always feel that I'm lucky when I'm able to make an autobiographical detail work in a poem. And that said, you still won't find any poem, even if the speaker is someone who seems to match my demographics, even if there are stories that I can tell you like I did, like that really happened. Still, there is poetic license. There's always poetic license, because my job is to make the poem work so that the reader can take away something meaningful. Your second question
had to do with the characteristics of...
Oh, an era of poetry. Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of think that I think maybe we're always in eras of poetry, in the sense that, poets are always writing under and above the radar. There's a way in which, again, because it's not an art that has dependable means of mainstream distribution, it's sometimes hard to know what we're in the midst of if it's not something that you can easily see, if it's not something that you usually see in the newspaper, you don't see it on television, all of that. So given that you don't really see poetry much in the newspaper or on TV, does that mean we're not in an era of poetry? Well, no. I mean, I think we're actually in an extraordinary era of poetry, and I think we mostly are. But I think right now, American poetry, for example, is extremely, extremely vibrant, alive, diverse, tremendously diverse. I mean, you know, you just see so many different styles of writing that are flourishing these days and have places and communities in which to flourish. So I think these are good times for poetry, and that, you know, the hope and the wish is that there's just continued more and more and more dissemination, reading, reciting, so forth and so on. Yeah, thank you.
I just have a comment about the era in poetry thing. I think my opinion is either you're like in the midst of a mess, like a mess of a time like the 60s, everything was crazy, or 90s, when things got good. You're either in the real bad like part where people write good, and or you're in, I'm sorry,
That's okay, take your time.
I think way too like hard for my own self. I get a brain injury, I get myself in trouble, I know what I want to say inside my head, but it don't always come out. Sorry.
That's okay. Do you want to take a minute and say more?
Yeah.
Well, I can come back to you, but I think, I guess I would just want to continue to assert that, you know, I think that the people who are going to write poems seriously, and the people who are going to think of themselves as poets, I don't really think anything can stop them or stop you. Really nothing. People write poems on toilet paper in prison. People, when they don't have toilet paper in prison, they memorize poems. If you are supposed to be a poet, and that is how, you know, that is your gift, and that is what you're meant to be doing. You know, bad times, good times, however you define them, really, 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 really can't get in the way of that. Lucille Clifton, who had 6 children, talks about, you know, someone asked her, well, what are the best conditions for writing poetry? And it was great, because usually with that question you expect an answer like, I need absolute silence, fresh flowers on my table, you know, my perfect Pete's coffee, I have been that person. And then I had children. And so what I love, Lucille Clifton said, for me the ideal conditions are someone's got the measles, I'm at the kitchen table, you know, this one's hitting that one, you know, things are spilling all around me. But that what her challenge out of her need to be a poet is to know how to find that space. And then she says, why do you think my poems are so short? But you know, that's a poetics for her. I mean, that incredibly, incredibly distilled, meditative, pithy thing, which try to write a poem like a Lucille Clifton poem that's actually deep. Very, 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 very hard. So her circumstances led to her poetics. The poet Wanda Coleman talks about poems as the poor people's art form. She said, because I can write poems when I'm waiting online, because if you're poor, you wait online a lot. You can't write a novel waiting online. You can write poems waiting online. So, you know, I think that if you must, you will. That's really what I think. One sec, let me call on this gentleman who had his hand up before.
Yeah, it's an artist poet kind of question. One of the delights I find in reading your poetry is that I'm learning things that I didn't know before. I went to the dictionary to find out some things and go to the websites to find Betty Shabazz. I didn't remember who that was. So your poetry it is presenting a sensitivity to a history we don't get typically in school. Is that do you feel like that is a motivation in your poetry? Do you write with that in mind, the purpose of teaching and he's, I guess, explaining things that you don't.
Yeah, that's a neat question. Well, the short answer is no, because I don't assume what people do or don't know. I encountered this with my very first book, which came out from the University of Virginia Press. They didn't print very many poems at the time. In fact, they said, it's your book and it's Mr. Jefferson. So, you know, my book was a little anomalous, and they wanted me to put explanatory notes, you know, zillions of explanatory notes in the back of the book. And I said, you know, I just really don't know who's going to read this book, and I don't know what they know, and isn't one of the things that reading poetry is supposed to do is make you go and learn something? That hopefully the experience that anybody can have is a musical experience, right? That you know that you are in the presence of heightened language, and that you have that experience. This happens to me as a reader every day. I read a poem, and maybe I hope every aspect of it is not absolutely crystal clear to me, but I have, if it's a poem that speaks to me, I have that musical wash. And then, if I want to learn more, I go and I find out more. That's a very, very primordial part of my poetry reading experience. So I don't like to assume, and I don't like to be, unless I'm in a Norton Critical Edition on purpose, I don't like to be told too much, because that becomes a text unto itself, and it becomes a text that, you know, often has very profound cultural implications. In this particular case, it was African American poet, and African American cultural references will not make sense to our presumably white readers who won't, we presume, know these things about African. Well, I don't want to go there, because I don't know, you know, and I think it's really important to say I don't know, and that people can find out if they come to the poems that way. Now that said, I'm a teacher, that's my job, that's what I do. So there probably is, if not the, well, perhaps the instructive impulse, if you will, but even more so, you know, the world in my lived life is, among other things, the world of reading and thinking and teaching and knowing really cool stuff. Which for me, in my study of African American culture, you know, there is so much that is so extraordinary that I suppose there probably is a part of me that just sees how it can so easily be made into poems, although that act of transformation is always a very, very difficult one. But certainly my life as someone who teaches and who's a scholar of African American literature is a part of the lived experience that I bring to poems, just like my life as a, you know, as a mother, or as, you know, an American, or as any number of other things. Yeah, you're very welcome. Anything else? Yes, and then yes.
Earlier when you were talking about Gwendolyn Brooks, you said that she was one of the top 5 poets of the 20th century. Who are the other poets?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I could, because really, you know, that statement is intended to put her up there. Okay. It's really intended to put her up there. So, and you know, my top 5, you know, maybe someone moves around in there, and so forth and so on. So, I mean, I could name, you know, some 20th century poets who have meant a lot to me. Elizabeth Bishop is a poet whose work has meant a lot to me. At a certain point, American poets, I'm thinking William Carlos Williams has meant a lot to me. Long time ago, though. Robert Hayden is a tremendously, tremendously important poet to me. I think Langston Hughes is, I would put him up there too, you know, not just, he's sort of, you know, he's like #1 on the Billboard African American poetry list, but he's not enough on the, you know, whatever the mainstream, the pop list. And I think that the ways in which Langston Hughes has transformed American poetry writ large over a very long and productive period of writing as well, you know, from about more or less 1919, 1920 to 1967. In changing, I mean, that's a really quite a span of time to write across. So those are a few who have meant a lot to me. And then also, I mean, I guess maybe if you could call modernism a poet, you know, if you could talk about modernist poetry as one entry. I think that that's also been incredibly, incredibly transformative. Yes.
Okay, about her question about are we in an era of poetry, I think that there's really two main eras of poetry, and we're constantly flowing through a cycle. The starting point of that cycle is like some sort of hardship or turmoil, then segues into maybe, I can't think of the word, someone help.
Good times?
Yeah, but I was trying to sound fancy. Come on.
I'm sorry.
Bounty.
Yeah, and just out of those two, let's say, decades, they'll have, that's when the majority of poetry will come out of an era. And